What was probably the world's first racing car was in fact a converted steam train, cobbled together from junkyard scrap. After being used in races and demonstrations, it found more use as a train once more and ended up being used to chop hay. This is not only the story of the first racing car, but also of the first motor race. In fact, the world's first motor race was an illegal street race featuring that converted steam train running through the streets of one of Victorian England's biggest cities, completely against the law. It all sounds very strange, but it's true. In this video, I'm going to take a look at the bizarre story of what seems to be the first proper motor race ever held. When was the first motor race? When they built the second car. It's a famous quote, variants of which are regularly attributed to Henry Ford. But the thing is, it's complete nonsense. There's no real evidence Ford ever said anything like this, and despite that, the fact is the first race took place a long time after motorised road vehicles were first invented. If you ask online when the first motor race was, the AI will probably tell you that the first motor race took place in France in 1887, or possibly in 1894. But in reality, there was at least one race 20 years earlier in Manchester, England. The story begins with a British engineer and businessman from Stockport by the name of Isaac Watt Bolton. Bolton was a fairly colourful character, and perhaps something we might call today a bit of a dodgy wheeler and dealer. His professional career started with him working at his father's canal boat business in the 1840s. Bolton Jr. and Bolton Sr. did seem to be cut from the same cloth. The pair of them were arrested for stealing a boat, and they were both sent to prison. After leaving prison, Bolton Jr. created a business building and repairing steam engines, and that business led to him acquiring a number of second-hand railway locomotives, which he then started to rent out for various jobs. Railways back then were big business. They were the new big thing, in fact, and Britain was crisscrossed with iron roads. Bolton made his business from finding old locomotives that the big railway firms didn't want anymore, buying them up cheaply, modifying them, and then renting them out for anybody to use. This is exactly how what may be the world's first motor racing vehicle came into existence. Late in the 1850s, Bolton was poking around in the works of a local carriage company when he noticed a peculiar-looking contraption in the scrap heap. It turned out that this pile of old iron were the remains of an Adams steam carriage, a sort of self-propelled locomotive and passenger car all rolled into one, what might later have been called a rail motor or an auto coach. The history of this contraption remains a little bit unclear, but Bolton decided it was just the thing for him. It's thought that it probably looked a little bit like the picture here, a similar vehicle created by Adams called the Fairfield. Initially, Bolton used the remains of the rail motor to run sporadic, but otherwise conventional rail services, but he soon found that there wasn't much interest in that locomotive being used for that function, and this drawing here might well represent what the vehicle looked like at this point. It is not entirely clear why Bolton did what he did next, but nonetheless he did it. He turned the train into what today we would call a car. But at the time it was described as a road locomotive. Pictures of the machine have proven elusive and often mistitled, though this early image could be quite indicative of what it might well have looked like. It's often captioned as being Bolton's 1899 motor carriage, but studying the image it is in reality something much earlier, and I believe this actually could be an image of that first ever racing vehicle. To convert the railway vehicle into a road-going vehicle, or a road locomotive, Bolton removed the rear section altogether and added a single front wheel for steering. That sat in place of the original pair of railway wheels. He then fitted the rear axle with some road wheels, which were reportedly 29-inch rims for those who count. And that was about it. In this guise, on the unpaved and cobbled roads of northern England, the car, as I guess we should call it, hit speeds of 20 miles an hour. The vehicle did have some suspension, with the driving and steering wheels both sprung. It also had a 2-speed transmission with gear ratios of 6.5 to 1 and 11 to 1. Bolton later increased the size of the rear wheels to 62-inch rims, and then challenged somebody he knew to a race. And this possibly was the first ever motor race. Bolton's opponent was a man by the name of Schmid, who had his own steam carriage. It had been built about 10 years earlier by Daniel Adamson's ironworks. Schmid's vehicle was larger than the Bolton design and featured a single boiler powering 2 cylinders attached to each side of the vehicle. These cylinders powered 2 driving wheels which had 42-inch rims. Like Bolton's vehicle, a single wheel was used for steering. A course was agreed running west from Ashton-under-Lyne, through central Manchester and on to Old Trafford, an area just southwest of the city centre, today made famous by the Manchester United football team stadium. The reason for this route was simple. Bolton and Schmidt were both based in the Ashton area, and while that day there was to be an exhibition of road vehicles in Old Trafford. The course for the race measured about 8 miles. However, there's slight uncertainty, as there was some suggestion that Schmidt and Bolton started from different points, Schmidt having about a quarter-mile head start on Bolton's vehicle. So it's not entirely clear whether both cars started on the starting line together or just largely followed the same route. There was something more of a pressing problem. The year was 1867. 2 years earlier, the British government had passed laws which prevented motor vehicles from being driven at speed on the public highway. The law stated that to drive a motor vehicle on the public highway, a pedestrian must walk in front of the motor vehicle, about 60 yards in front, or about 54 metres if you use proper units, waving a red flag to warn motorists and horses of the impending arrival of another motor vehicle. The top speed of all motor vehicles was strictly limited. 4 mph was the speed limit in the countryside and just 2 mph in urban areas. These limits and the red flag man were introduced to protect horse-drawn vehicles and riders from being startled or injured by the rapid approach of a motor vehicle. This means that to be legal, the race would have had to be run at walking pace, and it wasn't. Perhaps to avoid the unwanted attention of the authorities, Schmidt and Bolton agreed to start the race at 4:30 in the morning. It was still dark, though not long before first light. The race got underway, and within the first mile, the Bolton machine, complete with 5 passengers, overtook Schmidt's larger Adamson-built vehicle and covered the first 4 miles of the route in 16 minutes, an average speed of 15 miles an hour, or just over 24 kph in modern units, more than 3 times faster than the law allowed. This was an illegal street race. Bolton's machine held on to the lead all the way to the finish. The two vehicles had to slow as they navigated the urban areas of downtown Manchester, but the race was over in less than an hour, meaning the average speed of Bolton's winning vehicle was in excess of 8 miles an hour, way more than what was legal at the time, and certainly way more than you could achieve if you were following a fellow waving a red flag. At the end of the race, Bolton was apparently awarded a silver medal to commemorate the victory, and both competitors went on to demonstrate the agility of their vehicles by driving them in circles. Don't think it quite counts as donuts, because donuts at 2 miles an hour are perhaps not quite as spectacular. Nonetheless, Bolton's racer was then rented out to the local railway company, and it was used for experimental road journeys between Stafford and Birmingham. After that, it was converted into a tramway locomotive for some time. Eventually, the chassis was disposed of, and the boiler and mechanical parts were then used to power the machinery at Bolton's own workshops. In 1897, those parts were sold off to a farmer from Cheshire who used it to power a hay chopping machine, something of a sad end for such an interesting machine. Schmidt's machine seemed to have a shorter but more illustrious career. After the race in Manchester, it was used to demonstrate its technology, including on a trip to the International Maritime Exhibition in Le Havre, France. But you'll note at this point I've talked about the first racing car and the first motor race, but I've not mentioned the first racing driver. Why not? Simply because it's not clear from any of the reports of the time exactly who drove the cars in that 1867 race. It seems likely that Schmidt drove his Adamson-built machine, but it's absolutely unclear who drove Bolton's vehicle. Recent articles all assume it was Isaac Watt Bolton himself, but there's absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. And when you start looking in detail at all of the evidence, there's even some doubt that this was even the first motor race. A 1905 book titled Automobile Biographies describes the vehicle that Adamson made for Schmidt, and goes on to describe how it was used. It reads, Mr. Schmidt gave his vehicle a thorough trying out, and especially raced it with several competitors. One of these races, in 1867, with a Bolton steam carriage. What got me thinking was the fact that Schmidt acquired his vehicle from the Adamson Works about 9 years before that race in 1867, and it doesn't seem likely, considering that description, that he waited to meet Bolton. Bear in mind the wording, and it's this wording that really gets me. He raced it with several competitors. One of these races was in 1867 with a Bolton steam carriage. If that 1905 text is to be believed, it suggests that that first race in Manchester was just one of a series of races that Schmidt contested, and not the first. So it could be that Schmidt's Adamson road motor was actually the first racing car, and not that of Isaac Watt Bolton. However, a contemporary source, the Engineer magazine of August 1867, described the event in Manchester as a novel race, which implies that the whole concept of the race itself was a novel idea. But it could also simply mean that the format of this particular race was unusual, perhaps those split starting locations that have been rumoured. It's a tantalising clue that perhaps evidence of the first true motor race is still languishing somewhere in an archive. But for now though, that race in 1867 on the streets of Manchester must still be regarded as the first ever motor race held, and that scrapyard special of Isaac Watt Bolton being built earlier than that of the Schmidt-owned Adamson has to be considered the first racing car, at least until we can find some more conclusive evidence. Thanks for watching, and I'd love to see what you think about what the first racing car truly was. Was it Schmidt or was it Bolton? And was that race in Manchester truly the first ever motor race? Let me know what you think down in the comments, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.